There was in their synagogue a person with an unclean spirit who cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked the spirit, saying, "Be quiet and come out of this person." And the unclean spirit, convulsing the person and crying with a loud voice, came out. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority." Jesus commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. Good morning, church.
Morning.
Gotta say, it's a pleasure to be up here with y'all. And I also must say that when I originally saw this gospel reading, when in preparation I open up the lectionary, I see what I'm going to be preaching on, and I wasn't exactly prepared for an exorcism story. I gotta tell you, I know they're in there, I just didn't see it coming. But as Monty Python tells us, you never expect the Spanish Inquisition. Now, these kinds of stories, these exorcisms or demons or out of control, unclean spirits, whatever you want to call them, I think they're always a little difficult to approach. I think they can seem a little hard now to wrap our heads around because the story, this explanation, seems so literal. It's simplistic in that there is someone with an unclean spirit. Jesus identifies said unclean spirit, yells at said unclean spirit. The spirit listens, screams, and exits. And maybe it is almost too simple or too obvious of a story that makes it so that I don't understand. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't really have a lot of real-world exorcism experience. So I'm left imagining all of this through a horror movie sort of lens, thinking worst case scenario. But worry not, I do have a plan. I think perhaps the very best thing for us to do today, in order to get the most out of this story and our time together, is to just step back a little bit from the gospel and to think of ourselves. Maybe just think of us and our lives here for a little bit. So right now, I want us to think of us and think of what occupies your time and space within your mind, your heart, and your spirit. Just kind of think and consider all of those things that occupy us. And when I think of it, there's both positive and not so positive things. Joy and love and positivity and all of those things. But, maybe there are some not so positive things that can possess me and control me and affect how myself and all of us act and how we feel. Those things that occupy our time and space in a way that it separates us from who we really are and who it is we want to be. I'm thinking of things like maybe our past or what people think of us or our self-expectations, what we think of ourselves or what we think is going to happen or anxiety or stress or any of these worrying type things. I could just keep going on with lists, but that's not really the point. The reality, I think, is as people, there are so many things that can occupy our minds and hearts and keep us from being ourselves and keep us from being happy and satisfied and fulfilled. Things that keep us from being who Jesus and God want us to be. The people that God and Jesus want to see. And I'm speaking for myself here, but one of the things that really occupies me and can fill my head in a way that I'm not always so happy with is worry. Concern. I worry about a lot of things. I worry about things without even thinking about them. I worry without even knowing I'm worrying. I feel like worry just comes naturally to me. It's just something I'm good at, perhaps. And sometimes I think my ability to worry and think things out is beneficial. But I worry about all sorts of things. I worry about things very much outside of my concern. Just the other day, I was full of worry and all this concern about the weather. And I was just worried about if the weather was going to be bad, what the snow was going to do, if things were going to get messed up, if my plans would be ruined. And then it all becomes my fault in my head because somehow I didn't plan appropriately. And Casey just had to remind me that I'm not God, I'm not Mother Nature, Zeus, or any other entity that controls or affects the weather. So any worry I have about that, any feelings, any guilt or responsibility about the weather, it doesn't really make sense. It's not about me, but it still does weigh me down. And I know it sounds basic and simple, but it's also real. It's just one of those things. I worry, it takes up space in my heart and my mind, and I can't let go of it. I'm just wondering, does it happen to anybody else? Do any of the rest of us have things that hold us down, like worry or concern or what we think of ourselves or what others think of us? Are there just these things that we let control us that aren't in our control? And I was thinking about this quote that I've used as the title of the sermon today, and it's on our bulletin, and you'll see it on there, and it comes from Johnny Cash, and it was this interview I was listening to when he was asked about his past and how he had overcome things and how he moved past things that he had done that didn't work out the way he wanted. And he talked a lot about his recovery in his life, and he said, build on failure, use it as a stepping stone, close the door on the past, don't try to forget the mistakes, but don't dwell on it. Don't let it have any of your energy, any of your time, or any of your space. And I think that's really great advice, to think about these things, but not let them possess you. Don't let them take your time or space or energy. So this is even Johnny Cash telling me this, and I think you may know I just love Johnny Cash. But I'm not even listening to Johnny Cash all the times. There are just things that I can't let go of, and for me it's worry. So I'll tell you another little story. And I was recently just parking our car. And I was parking in an area I didn't know very well. And I had to park the car in a deck I didn't know. But I had done my research about the parking. And I tried to find the very cheapest parking. I was very excited about this. I found this great lot. It's supposed to be a certain price. Like, okay, we can just park there for a couple days with the weather coming. Weather got worse than we expected, and a couple days became more than a couple days. Got closer to a week. So how did I spend much of that time that week? Well, I spent it worrying about the parking deck. I spent it worrying about how much the parking was going to cost. I worried about, what if I didn't get the right lot? What if I parked in one of these $30 or $40 a day lots? How much is it going to be? Now, this wasn't like the only thing I thought about. It's one of those back of your head kinds of things. So, I know that I knew how much the parking should really cost. Because I knew the daily rates, or at least I thought I did. I know how to multiply. But I just kept thinking about it. What if it wasn't the right lot? And it became this whole thing for me that became a way for me to judge myself. If I messed up, it cost more, that would be a big problem for me. So I just kept worrying until the moment came. It was time for me to go pay the lot. So I had that final moment of truth. I take my slip, I put it in the parking machine, and it gave me a price, and that price was about 1/2 of the price I thought it was going to be. I don't know why. I don't. Maybe I was wrong about the price, but I was wrong the other way. Maybe I got a snow rate. Maybe it was a week rate. Can't tell you. But in that moment, right at that moment, I'm just looking at this ticket and the price I paid. One, very excited it was half what I thought it was going to be. But largely, I felt so much relief. And the reason I felt the relief is in that moment, I realized how much I worried about this. I felt something coming off of me. I felt this relief that felt like a weight being lifted off of me. But having that weight lifted off made me realize that weight was there. I know that worry and all of this is in my head. Like, I know it's something I'm thinking about, but it felt very much real. Now, I felt possessed and controlled by this in a way that felt like a lot more than up here. And in that moment, very oddly, I thought of the lyrics from a random Baz Luhrmann song from 1999 called Everybody's Free, in which he states, "Don't worry about the future, or worry, but know that worrying is as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubblegum." It felt very true. My worry accomplished nothing. But the anxiety and the worry felt very real and very much did possess me. It went better than I expected, but I had all that suffering essentially for no reason. So I want us thinking about this today, thinking about this here, about the things that we allow to hold large pieces and parts of ourselves. Thinking about the things that we allow to have space rent-free. And I want us to think about this, not for the purpose of feeling like there's something wrong with us, or we do something bad, because I could very easily just tell myself, hey, this is something, you just worry too much, there's something wrong with you. But that's not my point or purpose. We're all wonderful. I think we're fantastic. And I really want us to think about this so that we can think about the next part in our gospel reading, the second part of the story, so that we can think about us and how we move on, how we change things, what we do next. The gospel story is indeed about a person being occupied by an unclean spirit. Much like I was a person occupied by a parking spot. But that's not the whole story, right? The story has to do with the release of the unclean spirit. The release of the thing that was occupying and holding down that person. And that release was done by Jesus. That's the point of the story, not the person with the unclean spirit. That's probably an even larger and more important part of the story than anything I've said. And in that story, we are to know and realize that an important feature of this is that that God has the authority and power and ability to drive it away. Drive away the unclean spirit, drive away whatever it is. Jesus has the authority and the ability to have the unclean spirit identify itself and be gone. And I think both of those elements are very important. The identify and then the sashay away. The here it is and be gone. What we are told is possible through Jesus is that. It's a story that is really about the authority and ability to change and make change. That's what this is about. That's what we are called to remember today. To remember who has the authority, who has the ability to change and make change. To change what has been, what is, and what will be. It's about the authority and ability to make things different, and that rests with us. And it rests with us through Jesus, through God, and through the Spirit. The presence of God in our lives and our minds and our hearts is what gives us the ability and authority to live with the burden of all that weighs down lifted. That's what gives us the ability to pull that away and be different people, to live lives that are different. We have the ability to make things different and to live more free and whole and complete lives because of the presence of God in our lives. Right there, that's important, because I believe with all of my heart that the presence of God in our lives is for that precisely. God's presence in our lives is for liberation. God's presence in our life is for freedom. God's presence in our life is for peace. God's presence in our life is for love. That's what it's there for. That's what this is all about, so that we can live our lives able and willing to lean into all of those things, into freedom and love and peace, and all of those things that are wanted for this world when we are freed and relieved of the burden of all those other things we were thinking about earlier. those things that just take our space without us knowing or wanting it. I want us to remember that feeling of weight I was talking about, that feeling of being pulled down, if that's physical, if that's on the inside or the outside. That from my parking story, that's what I mean when I say removing the weights. A weight that is emotional, a weight that is here and on the outside. The presence of God allows us to have that weight lifted. And that lifting allows us as people, as a greater people, to move forward. You know, it allows movement, but the movement requires action. It's our action. We have to do things. And action also in realizing what and how we are to act more free, to act liberated. You know, doing things once we have felt the liberating and life-giving presence of God. Doing things once we have felt the liberating and life-giving presence of God. You know, because it's not just an experience, the presence of God, and then we're just going to chill kind of thing, right? It's not just enjoy it, I've had a lot of fun, thanks for the time. You know, it's more like when you're on an airplane, that in case of an emergency warning we always get that tells us, you know, in case of an emergency, the assistive breathing device will drop down, and we're always reminded to put it on ourselves first before we help others around us. And I probably think of this a lot having little ones, but you know, I think it's like that. You make sure you can breathe and you help others. That's the step, that's the process. When you receive that life-giving and life-sustaining air, that life-giving and life-sustaining presence of God, then you go forward and act and do and be. You do all these things, changing yourselves and changing others, and what will happen is we change the world in the same way. That's when this happens. We, you and me, every single one of us, we become the presence of God by acting that way. We become the presence of God for each other and the world by acting in that. You know, that's how this all goes. And that's how I think this is supposed to work. But it takes work to identify and to be open and to receive and release all these things. Then it takes some work to help others. You know, but the one thing I really want us to remember as we end up here and we move forward with the week is that our call is to know that we can live a life free of what holds us down, that we can be free of what weighs us down, what restricts us, and we can be the people that we want to be, that God wants us to be, by allowing the presence of God to be there, to be unrestricted by being open. And then when we are open and feel that presence of God, we empower others to do the same. So I think as we leave this space today and go forward into the week, I want us to do just that. I want us to welcome God and God's freeing presence into our lives, and then us move forward and be the presence of God for others. Amen.
Amen.